This 4th of July, we pay tribute to the person who made this all possible. Number 22, the all-time rushing leader in the NFL, Mr. Emmitt Smith. So we're going into this holiday with the sense that much of America is divided along, I don't even know what to call it, ideological grounds, cultural lines and whatever. And it's a very serious time, but we have to go back to really what the fundamental difference was between what we had here in America before the revolution in 1776 and what happened after. And what I just illustrated in the intro was that, unfortunately, a lot of the real message of what this country means is kind of dependent on the point of view of each individual, which is kind of one of the advantages of being in this country. But therefore, you're always going to get, I mean, there's no such thing as consensus in this country. People try to get to consensus. There's always this desire, especially among people at the top, to find the path forward that will satisfy the most amount of people, because obviously that way they can safeguard their own place at the top. They can, in some ways, safeguard their legacy, which is, in recent times, it's pretty obvious that all of the presidents and all of the other leaders are kind of focused on that aspect of their jobs, not always on fulfilling the true meaning of their jobs under the Constitution. So what do we go back to? I would say that the United States, prior to the American Revolution, was on a course to become just like any of the other colonial possessions of the European empires. The British Empire at the time was developing into something that was a little more liberal than some of the other countries back then. The Spaniards, who were extremely doctrinaire and absolutist. They were always backing Catholic expansion. The French were not much different at the time. The British had already gone through a sort of revolution of their own, and I think that because of this revolution and because of the aftershocks that they were going through, the people that came to this country from Great Britain were conditioned more to think for themselves and to decide that we're not going to have a society that is based on absolutism. There's one person whose will rules us all, and in those years it was the monarch, King George III. And I believe that there is a quote that George III actually said when he heard that George Washington was going to give up power after about 8 years. Here, I'll find the exact quote. Okay, so it says here that when American artist Benjamin West visited King George III and told him that he was going to resign, the king told him if he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world. So we have to recognize that in spite of all of this talk about all the flaws in this country, we were miles ahead of some of the other states in the world, and these were real powers at the time. The United Kingdom was fastly expanding all across the globe and whatever. And the idea of limited forms of government and separation of powers between the judiciary and the legislature and the executive, that was not considered in vogue at the time. I mean, there was just this deep-seated belief that power was gained from the from force and for coercion. And I think we're still fighting that battle. It doesn't matter. I mean, obviously, if you've seen some of my other videos, I believe that our beef is no longer with the British from 1776 and 1812 and whatever. Our beef is with this concept that the government is meant to coerce people into living in a certain manner that they would otherwise not be capable of doing. And I think that history's shown it to be a complete failure. You have a lot of these great societies that, I just said great society, that was Lyndon Johnson. These societies, they crop up and, you have this dominant figure for, however many years it is, Genghis Khan or Julius Caesar or whatever. And for a while, it looks like that's going to be the great, the gold standard of civilizations. Well, what happens when that person dies or leaves office or whatever, becomes sick or senile or whatever, and somebody else takes over who's much more incompetent? Well, you're seeing what happens with that in a lot of countries. And I'm not trying to make this a specific political rant, but there's plenty of countries you could pick from right now where you see that totalitarianism, authoritarianism is driving the country into a steep decline. And I think this country is actually headed the other way. We'll see how it gets done. I do believe that we're heading towards an era where we're going to be seeing more of these powers devolve to the individual and at least closer to the people. Now, does that mean that we're just going to be able to defy the people in Washington, D.C.? Obviously, there's exceptions to the rule. And again, I'm not going to get into it right now because this is more of a generic talk about the meaning of the American Revolution. We have all these generations of Americans that sacrificed their lives in a variety of wars, and some of them, they don't really go towards the ideals that were set forth in 1776. The Mexican War, can you really say that that was in order to bring freedom to anybody? I don't think so. The Spanish-American War was also kind of along the same lines. And then there were, the great wars of the 20th century, the World War I and World War II. The rationale behind those was a lot different. We've seen, generation upon generation of young people, usually men, who went out to represent this country. And I think along the way we did lose a lot of that principle that this country was formed in order to resist coercion. It wasn't formed in order to enforce coercion. Obviously, I'm not a pacifist. I don't believe that we should avoid all wars at all costs. I think we've seen a real problem among people that they have this pacifist mentality. I mean, if you watch many of these war movies, these people are sometimes sincerely believing that what they're doing will create a more peaceful society. I don't think that America can do that. I don't think that that the founding fathers over in Philadelphia came into the room and signed those documents in order to create peace on earth. They were pretty clear. They said to form a more perfect union, and they weren't trying to disparage the king. They weren't trying to state that, oh, we hate the British people. The British people are basically ogres that come over here and destroy us. And I mean, they did say plenty of plenty of statements against them, but it was far from a hateful act. And then we're seeing more and more this debate over why there was a civil war in America. Well, you know, there's these people now, they're kind of Confederate apologists saying that it was really about states' rights and not about slavery or whatever. I think that it's a fruitless argument. The Confederacy and the Union were, again, talking about, I mean, the argument is over coercion. Okay, is the federal government going to coerce states in order to comply with a certain standard, which in this case would be freedom for all men, you know, liberating the slaves? And on the other hand, is the Confederacy going to coerce these people into working for their slave owners? That's really the message. I mean, which coercion is worse? And I still have to argue that the Union had the better model for the way society is. We're in this country in order to facilitate people getting the most rights and the most opportunities that they can, and in my opinion also to not interfere with their lives that much, and that includes not giving them too many things and making them dependent on our nation, on our government in order to succeed. So, you know, I think I've cherry-picked a lot from here and there. There's plenty of people that have opposing opinions on all those topics, which is fine. That's kind of the point of this whole experiment. 1776, they decided to form a more perfect union. And now we have to keep that more perfect union, because the people that are now going around and claiming that, I mean, I remember last year there was a group running around saying America was never great. There's other groups that they are constantly trying to revise our history and show it in the most negative connotation. Well, you could do that for anything. You could do that for literally every institution that's ever existed. So the focus should be on how to use the positive things that have come out of it in order to form that more perfect union. And I think we're on the way to that. And, you know, it doesn't matter who you support or who you oppose. I think we're on the way there. But we have to have, you know, real candid conversations instead of controlling people's speech and telling them what is okay and not okay to say, and what's you know, talking about toxic whatever it is, toxic masculinity in some cases. That's not going to form a more perfect union. In fact, it's going to break up a lot of unions, if you know what I mean. So have a happy Independence Day. Enjoy it with your family. This is probably the least political or opinionated post that I can put up right now, because obviously the news just keeps flowing in, and you know, you hear whatever. So enjoy your time with your families. Catch some baseball today. Saw Texas versus Boston yesterday. Pretty good game. And in general, enjoy your evening and stay bold.